Everybody. Whoops, nope, I'm not unmuted. Okay. Hey, everybody. We're getting started right now. And here we are. Ta-da! Happy Wine Wednesday, everybody. I'm personally sipping on... Oh, phone mute. Dang it. I'm personally sipping on some Pinot Grigio. Oh, and I forgot to turn myself off on the Zoom. So you're double seeing me. Here we go. Let me fix that really quick. Sorry. Hide self view. All right, there we have it. Okay, and again, happy Wine Wednesday. Let's start that over, shall we? I'm sipping on Pinot Grigio. Let me know in the comments what you are sipping on and how your week has been and how your Wednesday is going so far. Our topic tonight, last week we discussed what to do when you have emergency fry and you didn't realize the seahorses were going to have fry. So if you didn't get to catch us last week, be sure to go back and watch that episode because we talked all about what needs to happen in that first 24 hours. Today we thought we'd extend it a bit into why are my fry doing this? Should they be scratching? Those kind of questions are what we're going to discuss tonight. And then, of course, I'm going to start trying to cut us off a little more quickly so we can actually have open chat and cover Laura's questions from last week. And now I'm going to hush and say hello and welcome to everyone here. Welcome, welcome. Everybody okay today? Okay, that's
great.
That's a nod. We're all fantastic and right back for Wine Wednesday. Don't forget, folks, if Dan hasn't done it already, I will post the link again in the chat, but it's always on Seahorse Whisperer Society page on Facebook. And you're more than welcome to jump into the video call or in the comment section. We can all see what you're saying. All right, let's get jamming. And we will, of course, touch base with each of you after we discuss the topic and find out how you're doing. Because I know, Ray, you were talking about something before we got on. I want to carry on that conversation. But quickly, Dan, do you remember exactly where we cut off last week? Like where we were at in the, okay, we've now got fry and they're eating.
I don't remember exactly, no.
Well, we'll wing it. All right. So let me ask you guys this just to start off. I think we started to discuss it last week, but then we didn't really get into it too deeply. And I wanted to kind of just give an example of the difference between a nursery tank, as they're called, and a rearing tank. And this is a big overview, but at what point you need to start putting them in bigger tanks because water volume matters, and how many fry can you have in a certain amount of space. So I'm just curious how big you guys make your nursery tanks and how your water change depends on that. Go ahead.
My question is, when you say nursery tank and you said, what was the other one? Grow out?
I call it rearing. Yes.
Rearing.
Yes.
Okay. Because I consider them one and the same.
Okay. Great.
I do have what I call my grow out tank that I sometimes go to, but I really consider them pretty much all the same. The setup is pretty much the same, except when you have a smaller fry, initially you can go to slightly higher stocking densities, but as they get bigger, you need to go to lower stocking densities per liter, per gallon, however you want to do it.
And is that mainly, and I would love to know the sizes if you're willing to share. I know you're doing it on a much larger scale than the average hobbyist, but is that mainly because they're bigger, they're eating more, organics, what?
Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, I've learned from experience that I do well. The first problem I had starting out, and remember, I was doing it much like a hobbyist at the time, and I started with 15-gallon tanks as my initial fry tank. But within a week to 2 weeks, I had to set up a second tank and split them. And then 2 weeks later, I'd split those up into two 30-gallon tanks. And then 2 weeks after that, I'd split those up into four 30-gallon tanks. And it just got to where having to split constantly, it was just more convenient to start off with the larger tanks. I also found that when I went to the tubs, I did better. Mm-hmm. But there's also some science behind this too. There's several studies, and generally speaking, you can start off with 2 to 3 fry per liter of water volume. Should not affect your survival rates. When you go higher than that, you start dropping in your survival rates for whatever reason.
You said 2 to 3 fry per liter. I'm sorry.
Yes, 2 to 3 fry per liter.
Okay.
And when they get bigger, you need to drop them down to 1 to 1.5 per liter.
Okay, I was just putting it in the comments. I wanted to, and what you're saying makes sense. I have a few more questions about that, just about the water volume and the science. But I'm curious because Holly, you have a totally different experience. I know you might have to go quickly tonight, so I wanted to catch up with you really quickly. You're doing it differently, right?
Yeah, I don't have the round tubs. I start out my fry in a 3 gallon round plastic tank that I found at Walmart. And I have a couple of those. And to do 100% water change, I just fill the new one with water, move them to that one, and then clean out the other one behind it.
And I'm sorry, I know you said it. I was typing and I wasn't trying to. How many gallons or how many liters was it?
It's 3 gallons.
Okay.
It's a 3 gallon. When they got bigger, I moved them to a 12 gallon hexagon tank, and
And,
that was an acrylic tank. Now I have my 5 bigger ones. They're about 4 inches now, some a little less. They are in a 34 gallon regular tank now.
You moved them, the bigger one.
Two
I
questions,
did,
if I
yeah,
may.
because of
Yeah.
Aptasia.
I'm guessing, Dan, you're going to ask the questions that I'm asking. So go ahead.
Well, the first question was how many fry overall?
Right.
There's 5 in that batch, and right now I have 3 in the 3 gallon, and
Okay.
they're a lot younger.
Yep.
They're like 7 weeks.
Okay. And my second question was when you were moving them back and forth, were you doing 100% water change each day?
Sometimes not. Usually about a half. In the beginning, it's 100%, but I find as they grow, I don't have to do 100% every time.
Okay.
But
Is
pretty
it,
often,
it,
Sometimes it is every day. Sometimes it's every other day.
is that basically also because you're putting them in bigger tanks too, right?
Yeah, what it is that once they're eating frozen food, that's when I move them to a bigger tank because I want them to have enough food density
Hmm.
in the smaller tank when they're eating the live food, so
Okay.
that I'm not having to put tons of brine shrimp in a 12-gallon tank. It's easier in the 3 gallon. So
Gotcha.
And what
that's how I decided to move them pretty much is, once they're eating frozen, I figure now they can have, more space because I don't have to put as much live food in for them to find.
now,
Well,
if you had 250 fry, do you think the same setup would work?
Oh, heck no.
Right.
There's no way I could have honestly enough water volume in my house to keep that many fry, honestly, unless I did the tubs like you do.
Absolutely. And that's
That's the only way
sorry.
to do it to keep that many.
Well, you don't
that's
have to
fine.
have the tubs. Cheryl and Dan will disagree with me, and it is an
No,
easier
no,
and
I
better
don't
way.
disagree.
But you don't have to have the
No,
tubs.
Our
But
tank,
you can do it. You can do it in. I mean, when I first started, I was using 20-gallon tanks for
yep,
nursery.
yep.
The biggest difference is now when I set up a nursery, everything is on a sump. Everything has K1 media reactors. My filtration is completely different than it ever used to be.
Sure.
And it makes a huge difference because I can contain a much higher number of fry within a single system.
mhm,
But
Because you've got that water volume, right, in the
mhm.
sump.
well, I've got each nursery system is 40 gallons,
Hmm.
has 2 tubs, and a 29-gallon sump.
Yeah.
So, and the skimmer on it is rated for a 180-gallon tank. And all these things make a big difference in your survival.
Sure.
But it's one of those things when you're starting out with seahorses, you're not going to invest in some of the insanity that I have. Thank you, Dan. You were the one that taught me.
Right. Right. Once you
Well,
get,
you,
go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
um, now I was going to put up a picture of my first tank
Yeah.
that I succeeded with, if I can figure out where the hell I am and where I'm going.
Okay. Well, while you figure that out, the main purpose in me asking everybody how they do it differently is that there are different ways to do it. If you're just doing it because you just want to raise the fry because it's cool and it's such an experience, wonderful experience, to raise a fry or any amount of fry, then you can get away with some of these smaller things. I'm gonna let Dan talk real quick as he's showing us some pictures. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay.
Let me pin you up.
Let's see. I wish I could make this bigger. How do I do this? It's there we go.
Oh, yeah.
So that is a picture of a 15-gallon tank that it was a 15 tall, and that's what I started with. And if you look, you can see two standpipes. That's because there's a second tank beside it. Um, but I used glass tanks when I first started with no problem at all. And the reason I didn't use 10 gallons was initially the glass was too thin for me to drill it and for it to
Mm.
hold water with a standpipe. Where the 20, I had a choice between the 20 and the 15 tall, and at that time I chose the taller one. I was trying to get the rotational effect for what they were talking about with Kreisels, but um, I later found that was totally unnecessary. But you can
Yes.
see from the picture they're pretty evenly dispersed throughout the water column in there.
Absolutely.
Well,
Sorry, folks.
that one,
Sorry,
yeah.
folks. I was trying to make it a little bigger on my end. I apologize for that little glitch. But hopefully you were able to see the. You can always rewind, right? Once we're not live. And if you have any questions about the setup that he is showing you, definitely ask them in the comments. We do absolutely plan to do some, a video kind of walking you through how to set up a system like that. But as I said, what I was trying to point out by asking Holly, and I know Nicole uses smaller tanks, is that if you're just starting out, don't be afraid. You don't have to jump into, even what Dan just showed, which was better than what I started out with for darn sure, but showing that he progressed into larger and different systems too. So don't be scared, is my point. Dan, were you going to say anything else?
Well,
The
one of
reason
the things that we found out is originally the Chrysler were being used to keep the fry off the surface. And if the fry are healthy and progressing, you
Mm-hmm.
don't need a Chrysler system. All you're doing is turning it into a washing machine for them. And they actually do better in a circular tank where they're not expending energy trying to get back up to the surface. But I'm going back 15 years ago, and Dan's going back farther than that. And we realized that was not the way to raise seahorses.
Well, and I think, go ahead, Dan. You go.
if you look at the picture behind me, that's a tub with some CUDA in it. And I ended up with 1,400 CUDA out of 2 batches of fry that were born at the same day. Um, that was part of them. But the reason I went to the bigger tanks was because I was getting large amounts of fry.
Right.
And instead of having to keep splitting them up, splitting them up, splitting them up, the larger tanks made sense. And from a food density standpoint, what Holly was talking about, if you're culturing small quantities of Artemia, you have to be mindful of your stocking density of food in the tank. In our cases, we were culturing large amounts, so it was easy for us to put enough Artemia in a larger tank. And if they didn't eat it all, the tank was designed so we could flush the Artemia out.
Absolutely. That was one of the questions I was going to ask, is because in the dwarf video that yourself and Lucy both helped me make, we described how dwarf seahorses are very similar to a dwarf system. It can and very likely is very similar to a fry system. I was going to actually say, Ray, would you disagree with doing a
Well,
Chrysler style?
I did things entirely different. I was using 4-liter jars, wide mouth jars. And I did that for all the time that I was doing reed-eye. And I never switched to using tanks at all and tubs until I started doing Erectus.
Gotcha. And when you started doing Erectus,
My fry densities were way over what is recommended.
gotcha. And how did that work out for you? How did you handle that, with water changes or what?
Yeah, like the 4-liter jars, I was just changing the water every 2 days, and I'd do 100% change. But it was the jars with open-ended airline, lit for 24/7, with Nanocoropsis in there and a little bit of Chloromex, just in case there was an ammonia problem that wasn't being handled by the Nano. I don't know if I ever needed it, but I did it just in case.
Sure.
Ray, did
Then
you raise?
as they started growing, then I would put them into other jars. So like I'd start off, each jar might have just a couple hundred in it. And then as they got a bit bigger, then I'd step down to 100 to a jar and then down to 50. And just increase the jars. And then as I started getting more batches, I started running into trouble then, and that's when I sort of got forced to start using the tanks before I wanted to. But my first successful batches, they were in the 4-liter jars, if I recall correctly, probably for the first 2.5, 3 months. But progressively fewer in a jar from that time. Like my very first batch was 200 and something fry, but I think I only had 60 or 80 or something, I can't recall now, that I got to over the 4-month stage.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
I'm curious, Ray, when during this time frame, were you starting them out on cup pods or were you feeding them in refined?
I just used the rotifers. I used rotifers for the first week to 10 days, but probably at the end of the week there, I was mixing the rotifers along with the brine shrimp. And then once I see them eating the brine shrimp fine, then I dropped off the rotifers. But I don't think I had any time where the rotifers were past the 10-day mark.
Thank you so much for your comments. Okay, so anyone in the waiting room, I really apologize, but because we've had two very rude people who kind of ruin it for everybody, I'm not going to be able to just add people. So from now on, we'll figure it out before next week, make sure that we figure out how to limit this.
We do have one person that asked for that be allowed in.
Go ahead.
Lisa asked that Charlie come in. Charlie
Richter? Is that correct, Lisa?
Yes.
Okay, and I think I know Jennifer Kim, but I'm kind of afraid at this point. I promise everyone watching that we will absolutely edit that out, and we will absolutely have a plan for how to make sure that only nice people join by next week that actually want to talk about seahorses. So, but we'll be sure for that. Okay, Charlie is in. Please, anybody who's joining, I will cut you quickly if you're rude. Okay, and Laura, I'm letting you in too, for sure. And anyone else that's in the waiting room, if you want to message either myself or Dan and explain that you're actually coming in to talk seahorses, I would be happy to let you in. Michael Crest, Daniel, all of you folks, I'm definitely not trying to keep you out. Just we've had a bad time so far with this. All right, okay, get back to the point. So sorry. Mainly, I think I'm going to say, unless anybody else has a comment about the size of the seahorse tank, of what you actually necessarily need to set up for fry, which we discussed a lot last week. But I think that Dan's overall, what was it, 2 to 3 fry per liter? Was that it, Dan? I put it in the comments.
Starting off, according to studies, you don't want to go more than 2 to 3 fry per liter. I gotta use Mr. Tongue with Mr. Lips.
However, if you're in an emergency situation, or you've only got 3, 10, even 30 or so fry, then a different setup will absolutely work, and you can always join Seahorse Sources group and kind of get an answer for your exact situation anytime you want. I want to question on the list for Wine Wednesday was, what do you do? Is it normal for your fry to start scratching? And what I mean by scratching, if you've not seen a fry do it or a seahorse do it, is they'll literally take their tail up and start like flicking their gills, or they'll rub up against something and look like they're itching themselves. Who all seen that?
That is easy. That is very easy. Go ahead, Holly.
Formalin. They've
They've
used a
got,
lot of
most
formalin.
likely have ciliates.
Yeah.
Formalin will correct it. Treat on days 1, 3, and 5 with the 37% solution. And it's one of those things where you just have to look at what your water volume is. It will correct it. I will be honest with you. When I first started, I had massive ciliate problems. I rarely ever see any problems with ciliates anymore.
Mm. Okay, well, Dan, what is your typical recommendation if somebody sees fry scratching?
I do recommend the formalin. Our protocol has always been what
Oh my God. Okay, this is not working out. I'm sorry. If your friend,
Booey.
yeah, if your friend is
Yeah.
actually a nice person, I really apologize, but I'm getting rid of everybody who's not usually in here. This just isn't working out very well. Marina, obviously, you can stay, my friend. Anybody else need to go? It's a darn shame that people ruin it. You know, we just want to have fun and talk seahorses, but we'll figure it out. Go ahead, Dan.
So anyway, as Cheryl mentioned, we start off on day 1, 3, and 5 with a formalin treatment. We do 1 ml of 37% formalin for every 10 gallons of water volume. And if I recall correctly, that's 25 parts per million is the exact ratio of those who want that. But we do that on the first day with Erectus fry, or I should say all the benthic species of fry. And we repeat that whenever we see scratching, if we see scratching. And formalin has been very successful in stopping that. You know, if you go back way back to 2004, 2005, 2006, nobody really understood what caused the scratching. And there was a lot of people that were trying to say it was ammonia or it was nitrates or nitrites or this, that, or the other. And we pretty much convinced everybody after a few years that it was ciliates. Um, I've also tried doing other things to control the ciliates, but I've always come back to the formalin. I've tried peroxide, I've tried other anti-parasitic type stuff. The seahorse fry handled the formalin very well, and it's very effective.
However, did you figure out that it was formalin that would help them?
Well, I, I'm I, I've always been a good troubleshooter, if you will.
Hmm.
And I've different jobs that I've had have required that. And you know, when I started, there wasn't a lot of good information, and you know, I would sit down and I would look at what I was perceiving as a problem. And, you know, the first clue to me was that I didn't have any ammonia, I didn't have any nitrite. So it wasn't the ammonia and the nitrite. So it had to be something else. And then I started consulting other people in aquaculture. And the I finally talked to one of my friends who used to breed mice. It's Frank Gangi, and he suggested formalin. So I talked with some guys at the USDA, and they told me that formalin could cause fry to become sterile. Well, the problem was is he was talking about fish fry, and I'm talking about seahorse fry, and seahorse fry don't go through metamorphosis like the fish fry that they were working with. So um, I was hesitant to do it, but my wife at the time was more thought it was more beneficial to attempt it, and so I didn't know that she did it, but she did it anyway. And you know, after the fact, she says, "See, I told you," and you know that she was the first one to actually, you know, dose the tank, and it made a difference. And you know, then we experimented with it, and we found that seahorse fry extremely tolerant of the formalin, doesn't cause any long-term effects. You know, I've been selling seahorses for years, and almost every seahorse I've sold at one time or another has been treated with formalin. And in severe cases, you know, we found that they could even handle higher doses. I don't recommend higher doses, but if they can handle higher doses, they can handle this dose just fine.
Well, one of the things I found too, Dan, is when I switched from the basically rectangular tanks to the tubs, excuse me, I was able to run more flow. And I have not had the same kind of problems in the last several years with the round tubs with ciliates. I don't know if you found that or not.
Well, the flow rate in a round tub is more consistent. You don't have dead pockets. It's a constant, you know, circular flow, and it has a tendency to bring things towards the center and towards the drain. So it's almost like it's not true self-cleaning, but it has a self-cleaning effect to some degree. And when you look at rectangular tanks, you don't have an even flow rate around. There's pockets where things can stay, and it's very easy for, you know, stuff to build up in those pockets and to be able to stay in those pockets and not be flushed out.
Exactly. And I think that's why I haven't seen problems with ciliates in several years.
Well, even if you start with a sterile tank, completely sterile,
Mhm.
you can still have problem with ciliates. And Kelly and
Sure.
I talked about this the other
Yep.
day, in that when you take fry out of the adult tank, you are immediately inoculating the tank with whatever was in the adult tank. Now, ciliates don't get out of typically don't get out of control in the adult tank because it doesn't have the same amount of organics from the amount of food. In a fry tank, we're loading it up with organic matter.
Mhm.
So um, it's um, very easy to for the tank to become quickly populated with ciliates if you don't
Mhm.
keep them under control.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we find too is the better the filtration, the less likely or the less ciliates you're going to have if you're
Yeah.
adequately filtering the tank.
I'm sorry, I was doing some housekeeping. So was the basic overall of that water volume, filtration, less? Was that the short term summary of that one?
Yeah, I mean, if use the formalin when necessary, but the better you keep your water quality, the less you will have to use it.
Can I
Gotcha.
ask a question?
Yes.
What did you say? Ciliate? Ciliate?
Yes, ciliates. They're
I don't
a.
know.
Go ahead.
I don't know what they are. That's what I was saying.
They're a
Okay.
protozoan parasite.
Ah,
Well, some of them are parasites, and some of
Yeah.
them are considered commensal organisms, but become parasitic when their numbers get too high.
yeah.
They're always present in the water. It's just that when their numbers get out of control, they become an irritant to the fry.
And I have to say, I love when you and others come that seriously want to learn about this stuff and know more, because sometimes I think people that have been doing this a long time do kind of go over the head of the average or newer hobbyist that wants to keep seahorses. So keep those questions coming for sure. You know how I think of ciliates? Those darn little things, little bugs in the tank that you can't even see that are picking on my seahorses or my fry. That's my scientific term.
Like fleas on a dog.
Ah,
Well,
Well, one
to
thing
give you an
you can do.
idea, ciliates are able to feed on bacteria, which, when you're looking at bacteria that's submicron in size, point zero some microns, um, a lot of times what we'll see is that when we dose a tank with formalin, and this is where you can really know how your population is going. If you dose the formalin, a lot of times a day or two after, the water will get cloudy.
Mm.
And that's an indication that you had a lot of ciliates, and those ciliates were keeping bacteria under control. And now you've got a bacterial bloom.
I
So,
have never seen that, Dan.
I
Or
have.
me too. And so
unprecedented.
just out of curiosity, Dan, so I know that if you've got 300 fry or 900 fry, or you're on a professional level, I know that the pros start treating with formalin instantly. Like you got
Yes.
fry, you're putting formalin in. There's no waiting and checking and seeing if they scratch. You're treating the fry because, as you described, you're taking ciliates and other yucky stuff that will bother the fry guys. I'm not being funny. That's what it is, from the adult tank, or there's just it's just gonna be there. So you guys treat instantly to make sure that the population of anything that will hurt the fry is lowered, or maybe even eliminated. And I think we talked about gill flukes, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. But bottom line is, should the average hobbyist do that? Would you advise people to use formalin off the bat, or only if scratching?
Um, I can tell you that most of the commercial breeders that I know use it right off the bat. So, I can't, I'm not going to sit here and suggest that people have to use it. It's going to be a personal choice.
Right.
But if you wait until you see scratching, you're behind the eight ball.
Right. So if you want to so basically, I would say if you want to get serious about fry, and keeping larger populations, then this might, and if you've maybe tried before and had trouble and they started dropping, which is one of the questions that we are going to cover in a minute, what happens if you start just losing them and you don't know why? This would be probably the first thing that I would say is follow that advice, use the formalin. And I have it written up somewhere, but I'm so flustered now, can't believe I'm letting the trolls get to me. But bottom line being, I have this written up somewhere. I will definitely post it when we're done, covering Dan's advice for a short-term bath, for a long-term formalin bath, and how to use it with fry. Actually, guys, I do want to get on to the next question, but can you cover that very quickly, or have you already, Dan?
I have not covered a short-term dip. Now,
Okay.
one of the things that sometimes happens with formalin, if you run into a problem where the formalin doesn't solve the issue and you want to treat the fry a little bit more aggressively, you can repeat the dose of formalin through another course, but you can also do a dip with the fry. And given the choice of a freshwater dip or a formalin dip, I usually choose the formalin dip with very young fry. They seem to handle that better than they do the freshwater dip. So with a formalin dip, it's a 45-minute dip, and you're using a different dose. You're doing 1 ml of 37% formalin for every gallon. So it's 1 ml per gallon for 45 minutes, where the long-term bath is 1 ml for every 10 gallons, and that's done every other day for 3 times. So the caveat with that is what makes it difficult doing dips with fry is if you've got 200 or 300 fry, you got to collect them all, put them in there, and treat them, and then take them all out. So what I used to do was make a large sieve so I could collect them all in a sieve and lift them all out at one time and set them in at one time. It was much easier.
Yeah.
But you could do the same thing with a very large net.
Gotcha. And so I'm so sorry. I'm trying to housekeep in the background. So basically short-term bath, long-term bath, and the uses for each. But and just to go back and make sure I covered it all, in the fry tank, what's the difference between short-term bath, long-term bath, fry tank? Like the mLs. Did you just say that? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I just covered it.
Okay.
Yes.
Then I'm gonna move forward. Anybody have any questions about that? All right, moving on then. What other reasons do you see people start losing their fry?
I have had problems. I, at one point, had a contaminated culture of copepods. It had flatworms in there, found flatworms in the tank, and literally saw fry being held against the side of the tanks and wiggling, trying to get loose. And that's when I realized I had flatworms. Another problem is, of course, septasia and hydroids.
Okay. I'm sure other people have thoughts about other things too, but I'm curious, and we're covering a lot in this episode, obviously, so we'll be sure to have some notes for you afterwards. And here, I'm back. Hi. Cheryl, what do you do for hydroids? We talked about scratching. What do you do if you see hydroids in the tank?
If I recall correctly, I haven't seen any hydroids in years in any of my tanks, but Panacure will kill hydroids. The problem with hydroids is basically they're a little bitty anemone, and when they sting, they will kill fry. And the best protocol is keep anything you put in a fry system, keep it sterile. Don't add macro, don't add live rock. Start with a completely sterile system, because once they're in there, they will proliferate very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the colonial stage and the pre-swimming stage, and each of them is just as nasty.
Gotcha. And has anyone else had issues like hydroids in their fry tank? And would any of you suggest? So we've already said treating with formalin right off the bat can be beneficial. That really can assist you in dealing with fry. We've talked about cleaning the artemia with peroxide and all the good stuff. But should you pre-treat for hydroids and things like that?
I wouldn't. Not unless there's a reason. If you've
Mhm.
had consistent issues with hydroids, maybe I would. But keep in mind when we're talking about using formalin and Panicure and anything else, we're talking about using this in a fry tank, which is typically a bare bottom tank without corals, without other things in it. So this isn't necessarily what you want to do in a display tank. Um, but with the hydroids, there's different types of hydroids, and there's, according to what I read, something like 35,000 different species.
Mhm.
So there's many types of species. The most common species we see in the tank are usually treated very easily if you get the liquid Panicure, or they call it Safeguard. It's the 10%. It's used for goats, and you do zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.2 mLs per 10 gallons. That's usually, dosed um, every other day, once again, 3 times, and that will usually take them out. There is a type of hydroid that I've encountered that looks like hair algae. Um, it,
Oh wow.
it's it literally but it's different because it's not green. It's just kind of like a white filamentous type algae, and it'll typically grow on the tails, the hitches, and places like that. And if you try to pull it off, you'll actually pull the skin with it.
Oh.
And this type of stuff, it took me quite a while to figure it out. One day I had some scientist here from FIT, and we were looking at the tank, and I was complaining about it. And I knew it was stressing the seahorses out, but I still hadn't figured out what it was and what to do about it. And I had tried Panicure. And when they looked at it, their right out first words were, "Oh, that's a type of
Wow.
hydroids." And so once I knew it was hydroids, I said, well, Panicure can kill it. So instead of doing my normal dosing, I found that I had to go up to 5 times the normal dose in order to take that particular type out. And fortunately, like the formalin, the seahorses handle Panicure fine. And Panicure in general is a safe drug. In dogs, I mean, Christ, they never found the lethal dose. They were giving them mega doses every day for 30
Right.
days and still didn't kill them.
Speaking of which, before we jump into anything else, I want to backtrack just for a second, Dan, and ask about your opinion when people say that formalin is dangerous, since you just mentioned that Panacor is not.
Well, the government has changed the classification of formalin from may cause cancer to does cause cancer. And formalin is an extreme irritant, especially for our respiratory system. But formalin is used every day in many things. And the intent of the government was to cut down the usage of it, not to eliminate it from the hobby or stop um, commercial aquaculture from using it. But formalin is often found in makeup, it's found in hair products, it's found if you've ever had a vaccine, it's often used in vaccines. It's used in many different medications during the process of formulating meds. So most of us are being exposed to formalin all the time.
Right.
Um, it's just low doses. And what I will say, if you're using formalin, it is smart to wear gloves. It is smart not to try to breathe the fumes while you're dosing.
And as you told me, I'm looking at my notes, guys. I'm doing it. That seahorses don't go through the metamorphosis that other fish fry do, so it doesn't hurt them either in the same way, right?
Right. They tolerate formalin very well.
Okay, and Dylan's little hobbies. I really appreciate your questions in the comments, and I'm going to ask every single one of them. Just trying to make sure that we get through the fry topic first. But your last question was very right on the mark what we're talking about. So if you kept the fry in a fry box inside the main tank or a big, well-established 20-gallon fry tank, don't you think you'd have less problems thanks to the larger water volume? And as we're talking about problems you can have in a fry tank, such as hydroids, pests, or ciliates, how would you answer that question? I don't mean to keep going to Dan. Anybody who wants to answer can, but if not, then Dan.
I'll give everybody else a chance
Okay.
first.
Okay, that was fun. No, Ray, do you have an answer?
Are you talking about
Yeah.
using the same water that's in your main tank?
I think he's talking about, and I just want to mention for the record that I know people that do keep fry in a box in the main tank and they're successful. But I just want to maybe cover why that might not be successful.
Well,
And
I would say, just like in my case, I mean, there's things that could be in the big tank that aren't bothering the bigger seahorses, like the hydroids
Amen.
and things like that. but they will affect the fry. So I don't share water with my main tank for that reason.
Absolutely agreed. We discussed from the well, I think Dan mentioned it at some point that you're going to take ciliates from the main tank just on the fry and on any water that's transferred. So if you leave them in the adult tank, it's just, unless you're really, really good at this, and Dan's really, and Cheryl and Ray and Holly and all these people are really, really good at this, and I just wouldn't advise it. You're not going to keep as many fry
Th-
going. Go
There's
ahead,
a
Dan.
couple of there's a couple of problems with it. First of all, you run into the problem of the stocking density,
Right.
and that you're going to try to put too many fry in too small of an area. They're going to be bumping into each other, competing against each other, and that's going to present one set of problems. Your second set of problem is, as Holly mentioned, there's things in the adult tank that may not be in your fry tank. Another issue is that fry can develop. Your two main causes of losing fry are ciliates and bacterial issues within the intestines. So if your fry are crashing, you're introducing more bacteria into your adult tank. And, for a breeder, usually the broodstock is the most important asset you have. It takes a long time to develop good broodstock, and you don't want to put them at risk. So, and I'm not a big fan of putting Artemia in a broodstock system, so I wouldn't do it for that reason. And
Oh
if
yeah.
you really have good water volume exchanging between the tank and the small container, you're losing most of your Artemia out to the big tank. So there's a multitude of problems. Now, as you said, there's people that have done it, but they're not doing it with large quantities of fry. They're doing it with small quantities. And if you watch a whole bunch of people that do it, there's a small percentage that are successful that do that.
Sure. And if
And
you're
contaminating, yeah, you're contaminating your display tank or your adult tank with food from the fry tanks. And that's definitely not a place you want to go.
I was going to say, I'm really glad that Dan brought up the point that you're also, if you're trying to feed fry Artemia in a net in the display tank where your adults are, you're also contaminating and creating more organics and problems in your display tank. So the basic idea, I'm reading your comments. I see, someone who's very successful. So do I. Wink, wink. I'm not gonna name names, but I know someone who's very successful with this method. And if you're that person and happen to be watching, please feel free to comment and explain why it's working for you. Because the whole point to doing Wine Wednesday, guys, is that different things work for different people. We're just giving you the people that have been extremely successful a chance to explain why and how and what. It doesn't mean you can't do what you want to do. Do you, okay? Just don't come in here and do you rudely. All right. Anyways, back to the point. Ray, you're making a comment in the section. Also, if you have a batch of, say, 600 or more, you probably wouldn't have a big enough box. The other part of his question was, and I'm sorry if we've already covered this, guys. I've been jumping back and forth, but he said, what about a well-established 20-gallon fry tank instead of like a smaller tank? And I'm just curious, and all of you can answer, and then we'll get to the other questions Dylan has asked. But how do you measure, other than taking Dan's advice, which is 1 to 2 fry per liter, right? 2 to 3, excuse me, 2 to 3.
Start.
2 to 3 fry per liter, other than being scientific and measurement savvy enough to accomplish that and really figure that out. And, that's the right way to do it. But other than that, how can you weigh whether or not you need more water volume, or whether that more water volume is going to cause you to have to feed more? Because that's an issue too. I know when I first started, I was using the very smaller tanks and doing 100% water changes because I didn't want to have to. I didn't have 500, 600 fry, first of all. And second of all, I didn't want to have to hatch all that Artemia and see it go to waste if and when they didn't eat it because it was all over the tank. Go ahead.
I think what's more important with this is not how many you have in the tank. What is your filtration?
Okay.
Well, in the water
And
change method, the filtration doesn't matter.
Right.
In
right,
Dylan's case, he's asking about using a tank that's already established, and I applaud that move. I think that's a good move, assuming that it's set up correctly. Um, but yeah, given a choice, I will take an established filtered tank any day over a non-filtered tank relying on water changes.
well,
And I
Yeah.
have to applaud Holly because I have tried doing raising fry using water changes instead of filtration, and I've never succeeded.
It's a lot of hard work,
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's more
It
honestly.
work.
it really is.
That's
And
why
if you
I had to
set
do
up a
changes.
nursery with adequate filtration, and what I do is I usually, when I set up a nursery system, I plan on fry in one tank. I use the other tank as basically an overflow tank. And I can also, as the fry grow, I can separate them by size between the two tanks. They're still running off of the same pump, but I'm running a very massive filtration system on this.
And I need to mention, sorry to cut you off, Cheryl, but I need to mention that Cheryl actually shared this in a video, personal video with me, that my butt hasn't gotten out there yet. So I'm going to work on that this week, but I definitely have a picture, and I will try to post a picture attached to this and link it to here so that you can see what she's talking about, because it's an excellent system. And I would agree that for sure, if you could set up a system in advance and get it established and all that, you're going to have a lot less work to do, but then
Yeah.
you also have to be aware of the things that come along with things like live rock. So everything depends on all the little details. Like if you're
If you
using,
started out totally sterile, you ammonia cycle it.
yeah,
I mean, you ammonia cycle a system so that you know that it can handle the water volume.
mhm,
And as the fry grow, the tank with adequate filtration will systematically adjust
yep.
unless you get to the point that you've totally blown it out of the water. I mean, at one point, I had over 70 3.5 to 4 inch erectus in a 58-gallon tank.
Oh, don't tell people that. Go ahead.
But the thing is, when I set that tank up, I got it over 10 parts per million of ammonia to get it clearing ammonia, and I was running massive filtration. So a lot of it comes down to what type of filtration you're running on a system.
Sure.
And this is where a lot of people fall short because they're not running the filtration.
Sure. Oh, Ray was getting up. I was going to ask you what you were going to say, Ray, but I'll ask when you get back. I'm sorry. Sorry.
me
Trying to
back.
get everybody.
One
Go.
point I would like to interject here
Yes.
is that a lot of people think that because the fry are smaller and there's, they think of it as needing less filtration. The reality
Mhm.
is the filtration on a fry system should be much more robust than on the adult tank. You really, you're really trying to pull the organics out. You really want an oversized skimmer, 2 or 3, even 4 times the size volume of water you rated for the volume of water you have. You want a really good tight filter bag to try to catch the artemia before it goes in and junks up everything in the filter, the sump. Um, I don't think you can have too much filtration on a fry system.
Mechanical, biological, you need it all unless you're willing to do the work and have fewer
Yeah.
fry. Like Holly and Nicole and myself, that's how I started off, is smaller tanks. I'll say it again, but sure, go ahead.
Use
There's
the
another way to
filters.
combat that, and that is to do what Holly's doing, and that
Yes.
is work with a smaller number of fry
Right.
and not try to raise all the fry.
Yes. Well, the thing is, if you set up a big system with a 100-micron filter sock, a large 100-micron filter sock, you're running a skimmer rated for 180 gallons on basically the equivalent of a 60-gallon system. And you've got massive biofiltration in the sump. It can handle a lot.
Sure.
But if you are not going that big, do not try to raise up the fry, because all it's going to do is basically sign you off to failure.
Yeah, but but wait a minute. Let's really get down to what you're saying, because Holly said this on the show before, and I love her for it because she's honest and she's real. But are you guys literally saying pick and choose the healthiest and try to raise those?
If you're going to go small, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to make it clear.
Now, to give you an idea, when we talk about filtration, the picture that I have up there, that tank at that age, we're taking 1/4 of a pound of mysids per day.
Oh, let me show them here. Go
That-
ahead.
That is a lot of organic matter going into a tank.
It is. And go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
No, that's the point I wanted to get across. It's a massive amount of organics going into that tank. There's about 400 to 600 fry in that tank in that picture.
But again, to anyone at home watching or watching later, if you're like Nicole, Holly, myself, or anyone new, newer, and you got surprise fry and you keep 3 alive, you're awesome. You are awesome. And, you know, we're discussing the different ways that people have been successful. So if you have further questions, comments, or thoughts, definitely feel free to comment later even. You know, I'm just thinking of Nicole. I'm not trying to call you out and make you speak, Nicole. It's been a wacky one Wednesday. But she actually had an experience recently where her male gave premature birth to fry with egg sacs still attached. And, you know, I've had that happen personally before because I messed with a light on top of a tank and the fry were expelled too quickly, too early. They still had the sacs on and I gave up on them. So if you're one of those people that says, I'm going to try anyways, like Nicole, and now those little egg sac fry are swimming around for her, ain't nothing wrong with you. All right? That's all I got to say. keep doing you.
Well, yeah, one of the things I learned early on when I was first trying to raise fry is I was better off trying to just raise a handful of fry than trying to raise the whole batch.
Sure.
And it was heartbreaking, but I had to go in and cold fry.
Yep.
And I know it sounds mean, it sounds terrible. And that was when I had my first success, was when I finally reached the point that I was willing to cold fry, move out the ones that obviously were not going to make it, not allow them to contaminate the nursery.
Sure. No, I mean, I'm definitely not arguing with you. Think about it. That's why seahorses in the wild even have so many babies, because some are going to be healthier and stronger than other. Because Ray's back, I want to give Ray. Ray, did you have something to say? You started to speak and then you kind of got cut off.
Well, would you believe that I don't remember now?
I would believe that, and that's okay. All right. Well, then my next question is, how if you're in a situation where your seahorse has 5 million fry, okay, let's say 500 fry, and you're not set up correctly, you're not in a place. Maybe back on last week you had surprise fry. Even how in the heck do you determine which ones to keep? Bigger, stronger,
Let
what?
the strongest survive.
Yeah, I kept,
Well-
I keep them all, and then, you know, eventually you lose the weakest ones.
Hmm.
I actually agree with you, but Cheryl just made the point that that contaminates the tank. So
Not
as
if you're taking them out.
I move them.
okay,
I put them aside in another container and wait and see if they're going to make it or not.
no, I like that
And
idea.
when they
Separate.
die, I pick them out and they're dead, but I give them a chance.
I did the same thing, definitely. Guilty.
Okay,
Now,
Dan.
I have a couple of the ones I have now, I thought were going to die. And they'd be laying on the bottom.
And
like
then they
were
survive.
dead, and then
right.
all of a sudden they'd wake up.
I was gonna actually mention to you guys. Oh, go ahead, Holly. Sorry, finish.
So
Oh.
now, I mean, and this is, I started in that particular batch, I started with around 100. So at first, you know, they were dropping like flies, and then there was 25 of them. And as the days went by, there was 10. And then, but there were times, you know, when I think the smallest one I have now was one of the ones that I didn't think was going to make it.
Right.
And it just did.
Yep. I was gonna actually. I meant to announce when we started that today is little Cheryl, my very first fry to survive my ignorance when I first started. It's her birthday. Seriously.
Happy birthday, Cheryl.
I know, little Cheryl, because big
Little
Cheryl
Cheryl.
is actually a person, and if she ever sees this, Cheryl, I love you, and you're inspiration. She's a very inspirational, forceful, talented. I'm gonna succeed no matter what. I'm gonna make it kind of chick, and that's why I named this fry Little Cheryl, and she is still alive, and today is her birthday. So happy birthday, Cheryl. Anyways,
One thing,
I wanted to tell you guys too, my mini that was pregnant last week that was like
Oh,
ended up
yeah.
having his fry at
Yes.
18 days had almost 300 fry.
Oh, my
the one that
And
couldn't
I-
keep all the eggs in. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So, of course, all I had is a 5 and a 10 gallon. My larger three that are 12 weeks, almost 13 weeks, were in the 10 gallon. So I put the 300 fry in the 5 gallon that I have. I probably got about between 60 and 80 left that are actually doing fairly well. They're a lot of work, but
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know.
awesome
I don't know
though.
how many are gonna live, but I have a lot that are laying on the bottom. I went through obviously all of the ones that were laying on the bottom this morning, like literally one by one, which ones are alive.
Well, that was
It's
actually,
crazy.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think that's awesome that, that you're trying. I would personally suggest removing any that are done as quickly as possible, but that leads into the next question. Why do some, and we've already discussed water volume. You've already admitted you wish you had a bigger system to keep them in, not admitted, but you know what I'm saying, you get it. Why do some of the people that have been doing this for a long time, why do you think that we hobbyists that try to breed seahorses see fry? What are the reasons that fry just start dying? Dan, I'm calling on you.
Predation, uh,
Go ahead, Cheryl.
most likely biological. I have actually have photo. Well, I'd have to find them. A friend sent to me where her fry were doing very well. She started feeding frozen cyclopes,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden you can see a massive orange coloration in the GI tract, which was basically a fluorescent bacteria.
Oh,
And the bacteria was old enough; it had been contaminated, and she lost all of them.
oh,
So bacteria is a serious issue with fry because they do not have the gullet. They do not have the gullet lymphatic tissue to fight off bacteria. And when this happens, you're going to lose them.
so
I mean,
I'm guessing you're headed towards filtration. You got to have better filtration. Like when we
yeah.
go ahead,
Well,
Dan.
it's a little bit
Well,
more complicated than
the
that,
thing
though.
is, if you're going to raise seahorses, yeah, go Dan.
Well, the when you start introducing frozen foods, the mistake that a lot of people make is they put the frozen food in, they let it hit the bottom, and it's usually a double whammy issue that comes up. First of all, most people don't scrub their fry tank every day, and the bottom of the tank, if you're not scrubbing it every day, is going to quickly develop a biofilm, and that biofilm is from bacteria. The food hits it, it quickly becomes colonized. The seahorses eat the food, and now you've inoculated the seahorses with the bacteria. So the general rule of thumb we always had was when we fed, we wanted to keep the food off the bottom. So there was a couple different strategies we did. Number one is we would do smaller amounts initially, and
Mhm.
then we would increase the amounts as they became more aggressive in feeding. And then the food that did go to the bottom, we would give them about 15 minutes, and if they didn't eat it, we would siphon it out,
Yes.
and that would keep them from coming back and eating old food sitting on the bottom.
Absolutely. And I really love that you pointed out scrubbing the bottom of the tank, because people that are using smaller tanks and doing 100%, like either 100% water changes, need to remember to scrub the tank, the sides and the bottom. And or if they're switching tanks, as I think, well, I did anyways, switching between a small tank and a small tank, to really give 100% water change with new water, you need to really clean the old tank. I really like that point. But I really am curious for you, old timers. Yeah, I just called you old timers. But I'm really curious
Hey, I'm
as
not that old yet.
no, I know you're beautiful and young. But what I meant was, what about before the feeding? Obviously, everyone knows that the hardest part to fry is getting them trained onto frozen, or maybe you disagree. But
No,
what about when fries start dropping immediately within the first week?
no. The hardest part about raising fry is not training them to frozen. The hardest part is getting them through the first week. I've said for years, anything that I can get to 7 days has a very high survival rate. But the difference is I'm sterilizing my food. I'm doing massive cleaning on the fry tanks. I'm doing everything to keep the system sterile as possible. Once they get to that stage and I move on to frozen training is easy. But the difference is when I do frozen training, you've got 15 minutes to consume it and it's gone.
Mhm.
Everything's siphoned out of there. And I'll come back a few hours later, do it again, same regime. But it's very labor intensive. And Dan, correct me if I'm sure you have different protocol.
Well, if I understand the question, you're asking, what do you do if you're losing fry?
Yes, right away.
Okay, right away. If it's right away, well, in all cases, you want to go through a progression of things to check. First thing to always go is your water quality, and that is to check, make sure you have adequate aeration. Look to see what your ammonia, your nitrite levels are. Um, Double check your water source. Make sure you don't have chlorine or chloramines coming in when you're making up your water or your source of the water. Um, and then also consider, a lot of people overlook this, and it happens frequently, more frequently than you'd think, is that a lot of people don't realize having the house sprayed for bugs and things like that can have some disastrous effects on the fry systems. So you want to make sure that no aerosols are being used that can be landing in the water. Then from there, you need to take a look at your food source, because if you haven't found anything that's a cause, odds are your food is needs to be cleaned up more to prevent contamination, and that is most likely the cause. Um, that's in the first few days. Longer term, it gets more complicated because the question then I have to ask: are you scrubbing the tank regularly? I'm looking for other ways where there's bacterial buildup and stuff. But in a new system in the first 7 days, it's going to be something along the lines of ammonia, nitrite, chlorine sprays, bad food, um, one of those categories.
Or could it just literally be like, and it's a mistake I've personally made. Could it be you just have too many fry? And like I like that you mentioned aeration. Like
Yes, it could be. It could be if you have, but too many fry by itself, well, you'll not usually lose them in the first week. You'll lose some, um, but you can also, it's entirely possible to have a bad batch of fry.
Yes.
oh,
You know,
that's a good
if
point.
you've got a seahorse that is not conditioned well, people don't realize the condition of both the female and the male will have a large impact on the quality of the fry. Marshall Chang did his thesis on this um, a number of years ago, where he was taking and doing comparisons with fry where he was using um, myces. He was using myces that were fed artemia, myces that were fed enriched artemia, and he found there was a difference in survival rates in the condition of the broodstock. The broodstock that ate myces that had been feeding on enriched artemia gave larger.
Oh, we kind of lost you, Dan. I'm sorry you froze, but I know what you're saying, and I'm seeing this as a whole nother topic. How
Well,
you, hang on, Cheryl, how you actually condition fry or condition seahorses to be
Kelly,
breeders. Yes, Cheryl.
uh, I obtained in, I think it was about 2011, 2012, a pair of wild caught hippocampus combs. And I've
Yes.
already been working on those. The male was emaciated. He looked like absolute shit.
Aw.
The female was a little bit better. And I went through 6 months of rehab. I spent $300 on live mysis and everything else to bring them back. Their first brood, I can post pics.
Yeah.
The fry were minute. They had huge eyes, no snout. I mean, they were
Sure.
despicable.
Yep.
A year later, they started producing fry. That was
Absolutely.
actually really nice, beautiful fry. But it took me a year to get them to that point.
So the parents matter,
And
and I've always said that to anyone who has ever commented or posted their first batch of fry with their brand new seahorses who might be quite young. Is that if me and Nicole have talked on the side extensively about don't ever think you're failing just because the first batch isn't perfect, because it might be the parents have to figure it out too. Think about yourself as a person and humans. We don't always get it right the first time, right? Okay,
right.
go
I
ahead, Dan.
agree with that, but I'll also, my attitude has always been any fry that didn't make it was my fault. And
Oh,
Yeah.
Dan.
no, I'm
Go ahead.
serious. I'm serious because somewhere I didn't do something I needed to do good enough for them to make it.
You're telling
Now,
me that
I
a brand new male that's its first batch, it's your fault if he doesn't have a successful batch.
I consider it so, yes.
Wow.
But now I understand that in the wild they don't. There's probably a very high percentage that don't make it, and I realize that there's fry that are not going to make it. But still, I've had batches where I've been up there in the high 90% of survival rates, and I've had batches where I've had zero and everywhere in between. Um, I know that it can be done, and I'm sorry. I think we can always do a whole lot better than we've done.
I am.
Now,
Oh,
Dan,
no, let Dan talk.
100%.
Cheryl, let Dan talk. Go ahead.
no, that's it.
Okay, I was cutting you off too, so that's why the only reason. Sorry, Cheryl. Go ahead.
Dan, 100%. We want to raise them all. We do our best, and we learn and we move forward. And I'll tell you what, the survival of seahorses, captive bred seahorses, appears to be increased dramatically since back to 2005, 6, 7,
Mhm.
and other years. And it's because of people like you, Dan,
Mm-hmm. Cheers.
that stepped up.
Agreed. The only reason I even argued with you at all is because I don't want any Mermaid's Reef. I see your comments, Katie, TM. I see your comments, and absolutely, I don't want anyone at home to ever look. Dan's a trooper. These people are serious. They're breeders. Dan dedicated a big portion of his life to breeding seahorses, so he's definitely not wrong. Okay, but I'm just saying, if you're a hobbyist who is interested in keeping seahorses and you have seahorse fry, please don't beat yourself up, especially if the first batch isn't perfect. Keep coming back here, talking to us. We'll help you figure it out and get more and more successful. And I'm sorry Laura had to go again before I started open chat and asked her questions. Darn it. But we'll do it anyways. Hopefully she'll
Kelly,
watch it later. Yes, Cheryl.
real quick. Dan sent me a research paper
Mm-hmm.
yesterday or the day before. One of the
Um,
things that came out in this, and I was reading this and I thought about it before, is seahorses basically need EHA and EPA. Uh, what happens is most freshwater species or even brackish species do not synthesizes the lipids
Mm-hmm.
that seahorses need.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that came out of this was, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, okay, so we're trying to feed seahorses,
Mm-hmm.
combs, reedi, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
that are pelagic species. And once they use the lipids,
Mm-hmm.
they will not utilize the proteins and they die, which is a very different nutritional factor
Sure.
in seahorses compared to humans.
Absolutely, Cheryl, and I think that's a great point.
And
But I think we probably should, go ahead, Dan.
the only thing I
yeah,
was going to say is that when you understand fry
Hmm.
and their growth, they use the lipids first for their energy source, and it's a huge mistake if you're not feeding enriched artemia as
Mm.
opposed to newly hatched. If you're feeding newly hatched, they're not getting any of the DHA, and they need the DHA for growth, development, and energy.
Yep.
And you'll find your survival rates will increase dramatically if you use a very good enrichment and enrich the Artemia properly.
Okay, so last week we discussed what the heck do you do if your seahorses have fry and you don't know what to do with it. This week we kind of jumped around, sorry. Hey, cheers to the trolls. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you. You're making me money. Besides that, we tried to cover, what you can do if your seahorses are scratching, what you can do if, to maybe prevent that to begin with. We'll have some posts about this and talk about this further, of course. What you can do about hydroids, what you can do if your fry are dropping. Of course, the topic will always go back to feeding, always go back to enriching, and why that's so important for your feeding of your fry, because that will make every difference. Nicole and Holly both learned from this channel and from Dan about treating the actual Artemia, the hatchery, with peroxide and how that can help clean things up, and how keeping organics low is just really important. We've talked about the number of fry per liter. Do your own gallon equation, because I'm not doing it. And we've talked just about some other things. I wanted to ask really quickly before we go into open chat, and if we've missed anything, we can absolutely backtrack and we can absolutely cover this again in future videos. I'm a little disheveled by the trolls. But Ray, did you have anything to add? Anything about keeping fry that you have noticed is really important that we didn't cover tonight?
Not
Problems?
really, because I wasn't as good in my methodology as what Dan and Cheryl are. So, like as I say, the way I started out with those 4-liter jars and did that all with the reed eye.
Mm-hmm.
The only
A pelagic
problem
species.
I had was having so many, and being here in Canada, I just couldn't get rid of them.
Mm.
And like I've had probably over 400 that were between 6 months and a year old, and trying to get rid of them. And that was frustrating. And so for a long time I stopped breeding, and then when I started again, that's when I started on the Erectus. But
Sure.
the Erectus, I never did have as large a batches of fry as I did with the reed eye. The reed eye, I was getting 800 to 1100 fry at a time.
Sure.
And,
So you had a better experience with the reed eye?
No, the reed eye are extremely small,
yeah, they're a lot
tiny,
smaller.
pelagic.
Right, absolutely. But your methodology, that's what I'm curious, and we can get into that in a future week, because I want to make sure to ask all these questions people have asked that aren't really related to the topic. But bottom line is, your methodology, the way you were doing it, seemed to work better with reed eye.
Yeah, but part of it, how do I say this? Once I started with Erectus, they were basically the 7th species that I'd ever kept.
Sure.
And while I was getting smaller batches of them, I was, because at this time I'd started using the tub method and the tanks and that, and with biological filter and everything. I still started them off in the jars,
Mm-hmm.
but they were only in there for a matter of weeks, not like till they were 2.5, 3 months old. But because I think into that tub situation and the tanks, I was getting a higher percentage of survival. I wasn't anywhere near Dan's. Like probably
Sure.
my better batches would have been in the 55%, and once maybe that I can recall, maybe 60%.
Right. Well, and you
But,
made, I just want to mention, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to mention that you made a fantastic point that anyone that's interested in breeding seahorses and keeping fry, which is the topic we've covered for a couple weeks now, you gotta consider that if you actually listen to everything that we've talked about over the past few weeks and get more successful, Nicole now has hundreds of seahorses fry, you're going to have to figure out what to do with them. So if I'm just going to go back to what we said at the beginning. If you're just doing this to figure out if you can, and because you want to learn, and because you want to do it, then whatever method you are using probably isn't wrong. I want to hear about it. Please message me, make a post, tag me on it. I want to hear what you're doing that's working or has worked for you. And there's, anybody who's trying to promote captive breeding is good. If you get on a serious level where you're trying to do it to truly like make a difference or sell seahorses or something like that, my first piece of advice would be to join Seahorse Sources Group because you're going to get all of us all the time helping you constantly. And you can always comment later or ask in private if you'd like to. Before we go ahead, Dan, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I wanted to point out
Please.
that I've worked with a few people
Mhm.
that were newbies, had just started out. Their first tank was a seahorse tank. They had fry. They wanted to raise them. And I guided them through the process. They listened to what I had to say. And you need to think about what you're going to do with the fry because these people, there's 3 or 4 of them that literally bred themselves right out of the hobby. And
Yeah.
they had so much success, but they had no way to dispose of the seahorses. And by dispose, I mean they didn't have the channels to sell them. They wouldn't sell them to the fish stores. And, you end up with 100 adult seahorses you're trying to take care of. That becomes a real, real challenge.
Mhm.
And that was exactly what I ran into a number of years ago, because at that point, seahorses were considered too difficult. Nobody wanted them.
Right.
And I had several hundred adult seahorses in my home. But the other thing I would also like to bring up is what Ray was talking about,
Mm.
and that basically he did everything right. He worked his, what off.
Mhm.
And again, in Canada, the market back then, I'm going back 15 years ago,
Sure.
the market was not there.
But it's there now, and I hope. And if it's not, we're going to make it there. And one of the things that I really want to make sure, we're going to open chat like in 2 seconds, guys, I promise. And I'm going to ask every question in the comments. But the main reason that I ask these experts to come and anyone who's even trying to deal with seahorses to come is to share their experiences so that we can learn from the experts but also learn from the average hobbyist doing these things. So that's why sometimes I try to, repeat what they've said and say, but wait, we can do it a different way. It doesn't have to, you don't have to have all of this craziness just to keep seahorses. It's not as hard as we sometimes make it sound. The reason we do this is to help you figure out how to get better, figure out how to keep seahorses better, start off the right way. And if you want to breed, if you want to have raised seahorse fry, you come and you learn. And I noticed that, I'm sorry. And I thought Holly had left. I was going to say, I don't want to make sure I give Holly a chance to speak before she leaves.
No, I'm here. Power's off now.
Oh, I saw it go dark. Well,
So we'll see how long I last.
Okay, well, I'm going to say at this point, I'm going to, after I give everyone here, Marina and Nicole haven't had a chance to really speak at all because I'm always yapping. So I'm going to give them a chance to ask any questions that we didn't cover, share anything that they wanted to cover, and then we're going to go into straight open chat where I'm going to ask all the questions in the comment section. Marina, how you doing?
Good.
Anything about, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually had a couple sort of
Please.
A little bit silly questions. But so obviously if you're moving to your Seaforce fry from sort of the adults tank to a fry system, they don't need any kind of acclimation to this brand new, very different water.
Fantastic
it's not
question. That is a
Temperature acclimation only is all I do.
Hey, Dan, can you, that's a fantastic question, Marina. Dan, can you say a little bit more about what you mean by temperature acclimation?
Sure. First of all, the water that we were using, which is a little bit simpler than it is for a lot of people, is we had large storage tanks of water. So the clean new water was the same water that was in the other tanks, but obviously it'd be some slight changes because of use, but we would set up the fry system. We would try to get it stable and ready for the fry. And then once we had the fry, we would collect them, put them in a plastic bag, and then we, or if the temperatures were the same, we just moved them. But if the temperatures were different, we'd put them in a plastic bag, float the bag until the water temperatures were equal, and then release them into the tank. We
Wait, with
didn't try
fry?
to the fry. We
Okay.
did not try to, we didn't worry. We made sure the pH was where it's supposed to be and all this stuff, but we didn't try to match everything in the fry tank to the adult tank. We just made sure that the temperatures were equal and then moved them. And I've never had a problem doing that. Um, the pH is going to be somewhere around 8 to 8.3. No ammonia, no nitrites, and um, the salinity really is not that critical. In most cases, the salinity in the fry system would be a little bit lower than the adult tank because of evaporation in the adult tank.
Oh wow. Okay, because Mermaid's Reef made the point of salinity, but you're saying basically that just making sure that the temperature is the same is the most
You
important thing.
you can always drop salinity rapidly, but if you have a high salinity, you want to go up slow. Um, but if you look at where seahorses come from, which is most commonly estuaries, the there can be wide swings in salinity and pH throughout the course of a day based upon tides, temperature, rain, and all these other factors that kick in.
But for baby fry, just to reiterate, the main thing is just making sure that you're not taking fry from a system that's 70 degrees to a system that's 60 or 80, right?
Right.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
Marina, go.
So my other question is, would you recommend using artificial salt water instead of natural seawater? Just because you don't have as much of a risk of like introducing through the water your hydroids and ciliates and things like that.
My immediate answer is if you're not treating the seawater, then yes, it's better to go with synthetic seawater. If in our case we use natural seawater, um, but we had a process in which we cleaned up the water before we used it. It was filtered at the collection point down to 1 micron. It was bleached for so many hours, and then it went through a dechlorination process with peroxide for as a dechlorinator, and then it was going through UV and charcoal and that type of stuff before it went into my main tank. So in essence, I had clean water. It was natural seawater, but it had been cleaned.
Exactly.
Do you guys,
Gotcha.
just to expand upon Marina, and I'll give you another chance to speak. I promise. I yap so much, you guys. But in a case of a fry tank, though, or in any system actually with seahorses, has anyone that's used natural seawater that didn't have an extensive system to clean it up? Because there are places where the water's so good that it is kind of better in some places. So that's what's been a big discussion. So how can you qualify that? How would you?
Well, if you
My
take a look at,
Drysdale, who lives in Hawaii, uses natural seawater and basically harvests seahorses directly out of the ocean. And they seem to be doing fine. Unfortunately, we do not have that kind of
Right.
clarity in the US.
Sure. What were you going
well,
to say, Dan?
not just the U.S., but any industrialized nation that's along the coastline is not going to have pristine water along the coastline the way they do in Hawaii.
Right.
And Ocean Rider has a huge advantage. In fact, the whole island there is aquaculture where they are, and they've got a huge advantage because they have two wells at their wells, but they're pipelines that go out in the water. One is surface level and one's down deep, and it's deep enough that they can use it almost like a chiller. Um, so it's a huge advantage for them. But unless you're on an island somewhere, you're probably not going to have good enough water for me to say use untreated water. Now, I can tell you that down in Mexico, there's a couple of breeders down there. One of them in Mazatlan actually pipes in water. It's a flow through system, and that works. I can tell you that at the FIT lab, they had a flow through system that worked, but they had the natural seawater. They had a well that was dug on the beach. So
Mm.
the beach acted as a filter before they got the water. So the water was being filtered, and in essence, they were not the exact same thing I was doing, but it was filtered water that
Mhm.
they were using.
And we'll cover this extensively, and we have, but we will cover it again in future videos. KDM, or Katie, I'm sorry, Katie TM, you mentioned that you use natural salt water, but it's cleaned and filtered, and I'm curious how you clean and filter it. I'm seeing another topic on another Wine Wednesday, and unfortunately, Nicole had to run. That's what I was just speaking with. But Marina, did you have any other thoughts, questions about the topic before we move into let's just drink and chat? Or Marina? Okay, Marina's like, I'm done with you too, Kelly. All right. Hey, it's good. No, here you go.
I had muted it again.
Okay, go ahead.
Hey, Ray.
Hang on, Cheryl. Marina, did you have any other questions or thoughts or anything about the topic or anything at all? We're in open chat. Go ahead, Marina.
Sorry, I think it's playing up.
Playing up?
My internet's playing up.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then I'm going to quit calling on you, but please feel free to interrupt at any time. Cheryl, go ahead and say what you're going to say because I want to get to the questions in the comments. Sorry, guys. I keep trying to cut this down so we can get to the questions sooner. We're going to change things next week, I promise. But Cheryl, say what you want to say, and I'm getting to the questions.
I was just going to applaud Ray J for
Of
all
course.
the work he's done over the years and the species he's raised. And Ray J, you were one of my inspirations. And I hope you understand how much you have contributed to my love of seahorses.
Absolutely.
I had a natural love for many years, even before I got to him. But for me, my success was Dan started around the same time I did, and then when the org got going, I was able to get a lot of information there that I wasn't accessing on my own, and Dan was getting really deep into topics. So what I know came from Dan, and I wish I knew as much as Dan.
Don't we all wish
By the
we.
way, while I had
Sorry.
7 species, the only ones that I raised, dwarfs, but other than dwarfs was the reedi and the erectus. I never succeeded keeping the combs long enough, and then the angustus, I never kept them long enough. And the barbs, for some reason, never had any luck there either. Well, I can keep the barbs, but
Right.
well, up until recently anyway, but I've never been able to get the fry.
Ray, I hope you can hang out for a second because I really want to give you time to discuss the topic you were talking about before we started, but I feel terrible that we haven't gotten to the questions. So let me ask them, and if you have to go, we'll do it next week first thing, because I definitely want to know what you were discussing, and I don't ever want to hear you put yourself down again. Not that you were putting yourself down, but you have done an excellent job. I agree with Cheryl. You've made a huge difference in sharing and helping people further the love of seahorses and keeping them in captive breeding. And again, that's why we ask you experts to come in every week and share your scientific and professional opinions about topics. And that's why I always have, myself and hopefully Holly and Nicole and anyone else who's a hobbyist that wants to share that it can be done on a smaller level too. Holly, I love y'all. I'm getting your names confused. I wanted to ask you if there was anything else you wanted to share before I go to the questions really quick.
No, an update that Aptasia hasn't appeared again. So
Ooh. Yay. So you pulled it off?
on the babies now. So I figure I would have seen it by now. It's been like a week, over a little bit over a week, and I don't see any sign of it on the babies. I look at them all the time. I see them several times a day. So I've been watching. I don't see it. So
We'll definitely keep watching,
I
but
got scared.
no, and we certainly didn't mean to scare you because you basically yanked an Aptasia off of a fry, right?
Well,
Or a
I
seahorse.
tried to. I don't think I was successful, but I don't think it had really attached yet either.
Ah,
I think it probably, like I said, it probably got scared and thought I better find a better place to live.
well, and the other thing is that in your fry system, which is I think what we're talking about, you're doing so many water changes that my big fear when you said that, I was thinking of more of a display tank, because when you mess with Aptasia in a display tank, they release spores and then they're everywhere.
Yeah.
But you're
I
doing
mean, I had
huge
nothing
water
in the
changes.
tank other
Right.
than a sponge filter, a canister filter of their own, a little one, and like no live rock, nothing.
Yeah.
But see, I do have my main tank does have live rock, and so probably got transferred
Yep.
from the water from that tank or the sponge filter on the smaller fry tank. The little
Yep.
3-gallon had Aptasia on it, all over it.
Mm.
And I got rid of those sponge filters, after Cheryl told me, she recognized what it was.
Yep.
And as far as I can tell, it's gone. I've been watching for it in the display tank, but I don't see any. So I don't know, but the fry are okay. So
You just never know. I mean, sometimes it's crazy like that. I'm curious, really quickly, before I go to the questions, anybody have any thoughts? I know Cheryl left, but Dan, if somebody has an Aptasia issue and their sponge filters, is there anything they can do to get rid of Aptasia but not kill the bacteria?
One thing that you can do sometimes, assuming that the tank is set up where it won't harm anything else, is hit it with a high dose of Panicure.
Ah, so that works on hydroids and Aptasia and all that.
It'll work on smaller Aptasia. It
Okay.
won't work on bigger Aptasia as well, but smaller Aptasia, it will knock them back pretty hard. And you've got to hit it pretty hard, but I've seen it work.
Absolutely, and I know that in Holly's situation, she has you have peppermint shrimp in the display, right?
I have one peppermint shrimp in my display tank. And the thing is, I keep my sponge filters in the sump for that tank so that they're cycled,
Yeah.
so that when I set up a fry tank, or I have a sponge filter ready to go.
Yep.
So when I had to move the fry, well, now I'm doing a million water changes because nothing is cycled.
Right.
Right.
Right. And we already talked earlier, guys. If you're smart and you want to do seahorses, set up a fry tank, cycle it soon. Go ahead, Dan.
Holly, I can tell you how to cycle your sponges and keep them cycled without keeping them in the tank.
Oh,
Hey, can we please, guys? Because it's 9:30. I love 9:40.
No, I'm just saying. I'll
I
tell
love
you
you.
another time.
No, we can even make it a topic, y'all. I promise.
or
But
private message me. We're friends. You can message it to me.
oh no,
Okay.
Holly, we share everything here. Okay.
All right, let's go to the
Okay.
question.
Wait,
Okay.
hold on.
Nope, we're
Hold
going
on.
to the questions. Nope, we're going to the questions. I'm sorry, but we do need to get the.
One quick question for Dan.
Okay.
Okay. You sent me the information on the scientific research paper on the lipids. And it appears that seahorses require high levels of DHA, which are not consistent with basically PE mysis or even Saccharomyces. Is there a way to increase the DHA in the food sources that we're looking at.
How do you know the DHA is not adequate in the Hikari, the PE?
I don't know,
Yeah, that's
sure,
something I
but
thought it was okay.
Yeah,
but
me too.
The reason I say that is that Hikari doesn't publish their information.
right,
Um, uh, PE will actually give that offered to give me that information when I was doing some research on that, but
right,
Hikari would not. What I can tell you is that PE is a freshwater mycid, and
right,
by that assumption alone, you'd know that the DHA component is going to be less.
yeah,
Um, and as you guys probably saw in the thread in the group, there was a discussion back and forth over the myces, but um, Hikari and a couple of others actually do have more DHA than PE. However,
right.
the um, it still doesn't make PE a bad myces.
And I think we have a connection with someone. I think
Yeah,
Curry, Dan, because we went at MBI. I need to really get him in here to talk. What did you want to say, Cheryl? Because I really want to get to the questions. I know what you're saying is valid and important, but it's like a whole other topic that we could do another week. And it's
okay,
open
yeah.
chat, but I want to get to the questions. Go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just curious on Dan's input on it because
You're not
basically
wrong.
saltwater fish require high DHA, and you're going to lose a lot of fry because they don't. And basically, anyway,
Yeah.
Keep in mind, Cheryl,
yeah,
I sent you one article. I got about 100 of those.
Yep, and these are important topics that we need to discuss. But my real serious
Yeah.
fear is that we scare off anyone new or asking new questions talking about DHA, EPA. It's important. We need to talk about enrichment. We need to talk about our feeds. Abso-freaking-lutely. But for tonight, just for tonight, let's go to the questions and we'll
Go.
cover this more. Okay, how do you control Dylan's little hobbies? How do you control temperature on a small tank like that? A small fry tank. How do you control your temperature?
It's a great question. The question really depends upon where you live, because in my environment, we're concerned with keeping the tanks cool, where in a northern climate, you're worried about keeping them warm. So in our environment, there's no such we don't have to worry about heaters. Um, we have to worry about running the AC long enough to keep the tanks cool. And we ourselves, because of the gallonage that we have, we could not control everything with chillers. It would have taken too many chillers, because I had at one time 36 systems, a little over 3,600 gallons of seahorses, and I just couldn't have that many chillers. So we do it by running AC and keeping the AC cool enough that we got the temperatures in the range that we want them. If I was in a northern climate, I'd have to look at heaters, and I would probably, there's a couple things you can do as far as that goes. A heater is one, and on a fry system, you don't have to worry about the heater guard like you do in an adult tank. But it's easier to control. It's easier to keep the tank in range that you want if you put the tank on an insulated pad and then insulate at least two, ideally three of the sides of the tank.
With pads. Oh, that's a great point, because I was going to say, anyone else can comment too. I personally am in the same situation where it's more about keeping the tanks cool. Anyone who's new, remember, you want to keep a seahorse tank under 74 degrees tops, and I think Dan has expressed in previous Wine Wednesdays that lower isn't necessarily worse. In fact, that's better than higher, right? And really, what you want to control is not having swings. So I've always done it with my temperature in my home. Anybody, Marina, or anyone who's in a climate where you have to use heaters or chillers, because chillers aren't bad for sure, guys. If you're in a climate you have to use a chiller, you got to use a chiller, because you want to keep the tank under 74 if possible. And thoughts?
Someone told me about a device called Inkbird. I got a couple of them.
Yep.
And because I run into both, I get too hot and too cold temperatures here. So I don't own any chillers. I have to use fans, insulation, like Dan said, and also ice packs to keep the temperature down on the fry tanks because they're small,
Yeah.
and they're like the 3 gallon. The ice pack will work. I do have small, very small tank heaters in fry tanks now, but the problem is they come pre-programmed to 78 degrees.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about, the little hang
Somebody
things.
told me get an Inkbird and you set this device to control what the heater is plugged into. So when it's got a probe that goes in the tank, so when it detects, a certain temperature, it will shut off the current to the heater.
I
So
don't
you're
know.
not
I'm
overheating.
Have you done that though, Holly? With I know exactly what you're talking about. I got
Yeah.
some for freshwater tanks, and I know what you're talking about, where it's literally just a little pad or a little. You can't control the actual temperature.
It's an electronic device.
controller.
It is that you program like how high you'll allow the heater to get, how low you'll allow the cooling to get.
No, I understand. What I'm asking you though is, does it work? Does the Inkbird, which is a controller, work with the little pre-programmed heaters that are set to a specific? It does work with them.
Oh yeah, because it
Awesome.
just gets off. It's just an outlet that you plug that heater into. So when the probe detects, a certain temperature, it'll shut off the current to that device.
That's okay. So it'll at least shut it off. Gotcha.
It'll work with anything, I think. Whatever you plug into it.
And I love that you mentioned, ice packs and Dan said insulation. So it's just about getting it.
Water changes too. I've used water changes to cool down the tanks. Also.
Yes, love that. And Dan, I think that in the past we've talked about, you actually disagreed with me that the range, I've always thought that a temperature going up and down wildly was really bad for seahorses. And I mean, I'm sure you agree with that, but you corrected me and said that it's not that crazy important, right?
Right. I've seen up to a 9-degree swing locally with the seahorses on a daily basis between the tides, between low tide and high tide, with where the seahorses are. And
Absolutely.
that's a tide change happens every 6 hours.
Right.
I'll say it hasn't hurt mine. Mine have gone through. So my tanks for the fry have gotten as high as 78.
Wow.
And then I'm desperately trying to cool them off because I know that's bad with bacteria and everything. So,
well,
I try to keep them cooler. I let the temperature go down at night as low as 67 or so, because I know that'll fight the high temperatures the next day.
Right.
And I haven't lost any due to temperature, honestly, since I started using the peroxide treatment for the brine shrimp. I haven't lost any from that point.
Well, you made a fantastic.
So even despite the temperature being as high as it gets here, I think just being real careful about the bacteria, the water changes, and trying to keep it, like Dan said, at least keep it down to 77. Then I'm like packing ice packs, water changes, whatever I can do.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I've lost any due to the temperature, honestly.
I would agree. And I think that what you just brought up was very valid, because the whole, you got to keep the temperature low, which Felicia covered in her talk at the MACNA event, is accurate and valid, but it's more about the bacteria. The whole reason to keep the temperature low is so that bacteria grows slower and doesn't cause problems. So if you're paying attention to these things that are advised on this live stream and making your feeds cleaner, making your tank cleaner, that's going to make a difference too. I still would advise anyone that can to keep it under 74, but I get what you're saying, and I don't think you're wrong. So, anybody else got anything to say about that before I move on to the next question?
I have to run a heater in my barbs tank just to keep it from getting below 68, because for 12 hours, starting at midnight through till 12 the next day, I'm set at 15 degrees Celsius, which is 59 Fahrenheit, and the tank gets pretty damn cold. Even with pumps and that still running, it won't get down to 59, but it'll get down 62. And when I first experienced that, the seahorses were very lethargic, and so I figured, well, that's a little bit too much. So I went to the 68 that was recommended for when you're treating for bacteria,
Mm-hmm.
and set the heater for that, and everything's been fine. Well, for a few years anyway, until problems I've had recently. But the other tank, the ABS tank, um, it can get up in the daytime a little bit over the 68. So I have chintzy secondhand air conditioner that I bought, and that's pointing at the tank and keeping at the maximum 68. So
You
I go
guys, you
both
guys
ways.
can actually see that if you go back through the Wine Wednesdays. I'll try to find the one, but he talked about and showed. He actually went through and showed us the air conditioned system. It was really cool. But Ray, I'm curious, and I'm sorry I'll let you finish, but I'm curious. You were using jars for fry, and the question was actually based on fry. So
But it
did
was
you?
the basement.
It was in the basement. Gotcha. Go ahead and finish before I go on.
And my basement doesn't get much above 68 in the summertime. Probably because it's a combination of in the basement, plus the fact that I don't like heat.
Mhm.
So I have the air conditioning on in the summertime to keep it from getting above 21.
Yep.
Which is basically about 70 degrees. So the fry in, excuse me, in the basement, I didn't have a problem temperature wise with them, other than the fact it was lower than what most people would do.
Yep.
What is a safe low for the seahorses? Like the lowest you should let it go.
Great question.
They'll act normal down to 69, 68. They can go lower, but they're going to start getting slower.
Low. I've
Um,
noticed that because
yeah,
mine will get to 67. But should I like not let it get below 67, 66, like right in there?
I'd probably set my if it was me, and if you've got a controller, I would probably set it at 69, and
Okay.
that way you won't see any changes in them. They go to 68 and they're okay. But
Mhm.
once you start getting below that with the tropical species, you'll start
Mhm.
seeing them slow up. I've seen tropical species go all the way down to 50 and come back.
Wow.
Gotcha. Yeah, mine will be there a lot of times in the morning. They're around 68-ish, 67, and they're slow waking up. Yeah,
Yep.
it's like they're just slow to wake up.
And I'll
The
just
only time my fry ever got up to 70 was in the summertime. Most of the time they would be in water that's 64 to 67.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just reiterate, I know that it's been proven it's not as important as people think, but I had a situation where a temperature spike that I wasn't prepared for caused all sorts of craziness. But as we discussed, it was more about bacteria growing more rapidly and taking over. So apparently, we're to the point where the swing isn't as important as we thought it was, and just keeping the temperature lower is more important. And we just discussed the extremes. Okay, so I think we have already answered what filter should be on a fry tank, correct? Oh, okay. We'll jump around on the questions, but there was a question. Dan, you're killing me. Dan, why don't you take over the questions? Go ahead. Dan wants to answer a question. I'm going to hush up and let him do it. In fact, I have to grab something, so you're in charge, Dan. Go.
All right. Somebody asked, I have to go back and look to see who it was now.
It was KDMT.
Okay. KDTM asked about the freshwater seahorse. And every so often this comes up within a hobby about, are there freshwater seahorses? And there's rumors out there that there are. And the reality is we don't know of any freshwater seahorses. We know of some freshwater pipefish, but not seahorses. Now, the reason this keeps coming up is a couple of reasons. First of all, people are wishful thinking, but secondly, in Lake Titicaca, and that's actually a name of a lake in Peru, you can look it up. It's TITICACA, I believe. But they researchers have done several expeditions looking for seahorses in that lake. And if you go up there and look at the fossils, there's lots of sea life up there in the fossils, and that's at a very high elevation. I forget what it is, but it's like uh, Denver or something like that. It's way up there. And there's one of my friends that had a store down in Palm Beach actually had a 14-inch fossil of a seahorse that came from there. And at one time, they have found fossils from seahorses up there, and the old timers swear that as recent as a few years ago, there were still seahorses in that lake. But so far, every expedition has failed to find any seahorses in that lake. Now, I can also tell you that a number of years ago, I don't remember the exact time frame, but it's probably 2008, 2009. But I had a freshwater collector from Burma, which is now called Myanmar, if I say it correctly, um, said he found some freshwater seahorses up in the mountains, and we went back and forth several times, and he was trying to find a breeder that if he collected them and sent them, that would breed them. And I lost communication with him, and the area that he was working was also one of those areas where there was a lot of civil unrest and a lot of I don't know, it's pretty primitive in that area, and there's a lot of kind of almost like South America with the warlords. That a lot of bad things were going on, and I don't know whatever became of him. But to date, there has been no confirmation of any freshwater seahorses.
Okay, I'm sorry I had to unmute myself. So, but they've been found in brackish waters, and that's I think that's the confusion too these days. They have
Well, seahorses will be found. That a lot of times they'll go to the mouth of a river or live near the mouth of a river, where the water is feeding into the the estuaries, and they will a lot of times move into water that's actually pretty low in salinity, but they don't stay there for a real long period of time. They move around.
And before I go to the next question, I'm just going to say this is why we're going to start open chat much sooner, cover the topic in like half hour to an hour instead of 2 hours, because the wine is deep and the trolls are great. Anyhow, okay, tell me if I've missed any other important question. Dylan's Little Hobbies and Misty, Dawn Harris, I just wanted to say that I'm going to message you guys on the side, because if you're interested in setting up seahorse tanks, we'd be happy to cover that topic again or invite you in to allow you to ask any specific questions. But let's see. I think I was going to ask, we did pretty much cover what filter should be on a fry tank, right?
We covered what type of filtration, but not what filter. And I don't know that exactly what filter is that critical. It has to be a filter that does not suck up the fry.
Yes, it can't suck up the fry, but like, for instance, Nicole had to leave already, but she's using sponge filters. I think Holly's using sponge filters. You can pull it off. You just have to be careful and make sure you're checking ammonia or doing 100% water changes. Holly, you do 100% water changes, right?
I do when I need to. I also when the fry got a little bigger, when they were starting to eat frozen, and I moved them to a bigger tank, but they were still really small. I put them in a 12-gallon with a little Rapids mini canister filter.
Mm-hmm.
And it had, a little intake. The holes were small, but I still didn't want their little tails stuck in it, when they held on. So I zip tied a pantyhose toe over it.
Yeah, great point.
And until they got a little bigger, and then it wasn't an issue anymore. But because I needed more filtration than I was getting out of the sponge filter.
Well, we talked about last week, when you have surprise fry, you can literally set up a bucket with an airline and make it work for a day. But you do have to.
Probably what I would do now, if I have another big batch of fry, I just throw them in a bucket. Honestly,
I love you, Holly.
Because I have nothing else to do with them. Just so you may give them air, give them the things I know they need, and treatments I know they need, and just see who makes it.
Yep. See, on this channel, you get every level of experience here. And the bottom line is, I don't disagree. I mean, you got to do what you got to do if you don't know what you're doing, and then you come here to learn more. And sometimes Dan, Cheryl, Ray, those folks can be over all of our heads, but bottom line is they're telling us what we need to know and teaching us so that we can get better and become the Dan, Ray, and Cheryl's of the world. So cool.
No, it's great to learn on a
Yeah.
smaller level, I
Mhm.
think, because what would I do with, like you were saying, what would I do with 100 or 200 seahorses?
Right.
I can't keep them. I don't know anybody or anywhere that wants them, or
Right. So you're
I'm not
doing
a
it.
dealer. I'm not a dealer. I couldn't find a wholesaler. It's hard.
Well, once you get into it, you can find those things actually. It is very
Yeah.
possible. And I know that like Susan, Elizabeth, many people in Seahorse Horses Group are local breeders that do a fantastic job, do things differently that maybe we talk about on here sometimes, and they're successful on their own level. If you want to be extremely successful, of course, always listen to Dan. But if you're just a hobbyist trying to do this because you just want to and it's cool, do it. You do you. And if you want to promote captive breeding, join places like Marine Breeding Initiative, join Seahorse Sources Group, learn from the pros. But I'm just trying to cover both ends, saying you're not wrong if you want to have a little Cheryl in your tank that you raised from a fry and you're proud of. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. And as far as filters, Cheryl did talk extensively about, and another question along the line from Dylan's was, Dylan's little hobbies, sorry, was wouldn't it be better to set up a system, establish it in the first place? And I would absolutely agree. If you're planning to breed fry, you should follow Dan's instructions and or at least do what you just described, which is set up a system, establish it in the first place. And we can talk later in a different episode about what that actually means, because live rock versus dry rock versus ammonia cycling. Okay. Any other questions that I did miss? I'm so sorry if I have, you guys.
I think Dylan was talking about keeping them in the fry box inside a big, well-established 20-gallon tank.
Yeah, we actually covered that earlier.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want them in the fry box.
Right.
in
We
the
yeah.
tank itself.
Right. Okay.
There was one more question
Yeah, go
about
ahead.
using vibrance.
Yeah, and there I found another one too. Go ahead, Dan.
The vibrance is if you look at it, it's based on the color alone will tell you that it's primarily astaxanthin, if I'm saying it correctly, or nature rose as it used to be called. It's a great product, but I don't think that they don't publish what the values are with the stuff. And what Ocean Rider tries to recommend is putting it on the mices before you put it in the tank. And I'm not a fan of putting anything on frozen mices and putting it in the tank. I don't think it has enough of the components in it to use it as an enrichment for gut loading for fry. I would tell you to either use Selco or contact Alyssa and get some of her fry enrichment, which is going to be a much better product for raising fry or gut loading any type of Artemia, adult or Malpii.
And that's seahorsesavvy.com. Just
Yes.
to let you know. And the question I thought I saw was from Katie TM again. Thank you guys so much for your questions. But she said it's best if people don't want fry, then don't buy seahorses to do it. You can always keep just boys or girls, because it's sometimes hard for people to call fry or have the attitude that we've described. But Dan, I just wanted to give you a chance before I scroll through the final questions. Is it safe to buy all boys and or all girls?
Sure, it's perfectly fine. There's a lot of controversy on getting all girls, all males. Some people will tell you that don't get males because of pouch emphysema. The reality is that the tank set up properly, you should not have pouch emphysema. The other interesting fact is I just read a study yesterday that according to the research, males actually have a stronger immune system than females. And that goes hand in hand with most animals in the animal kingdom where females that carry the babies typically have a stronger immune system.
Ooh.
And since the males carry the babies, they actually their immune system takes a dip when they first get the fry, but then it increases once they've had the fry.
Mm.
And overall, their immune system is supposed to be stronger.
Wow, that's
Plus,
fascinating.
If you have a pair of males, you're not going to end up with a pair, male and female.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
get a
If
pair
you go
of
two
females,
males, yeah,
you
go.
might still end up with a male and female.
Yep. The other thing that happens sometimes to people when they get two females is that I've documented it several times where I've had females transition into a male.
Yes.
And so it's conceivable that if you get all females that you could end up with either a late bloomer or one that actually goes through and converts over to a male.
And many people don't want to get two males because they're worried about GBD, gas bubble disease, internal and external, or pouch emphysema. But just come to Seahorse Horses Group. Just come to Wine Wednesday. We'll teach you how to
It's
make
totally
sure it doesn't happen.
it's totally preventable.
It is. It's totally preventable. And so if you don't want babies, I agree. Just get two males. Because as they've described, two females, if they're young enough, one can turn. And I've personally seen it happen also. All right. I'm going to read a few more comments from those of you that come to actually share and learn and be with us. But if I missed your comment or your question, please message me on the side or, post in the group. We'd be happy to cover it in a later week. But let's see. We talked about temp controllers. Okay, we're not going to talk about that. Is there any benefit to running lower salinity? We've talked about lower temperature. Lower salinity matter?
The big benefit is saving the cost on the salt.
Gotcha.
I don't see, other than that, I don't see any real benefit in terms of doing it with the tanks. Some people think by going lower salinity, they're not going to have as much of a problem with parasites, but the main type of ciliates that we're dealing with in a seahorse tank can handle very, very, very low salinity. So your lower salinity is going to do nothing to stop them from attacking the seahorses.
Okay, I just wanted to say in a Mermaid's Reef, I love that you used the lower temperature as a selling point for your husband to lower the AC. Right there with you. I did the same thing. I have a really comfy robe and they can all be cold because my seahorses are going to be chilled. And the final question that I'm going to say, and if I missed your question again, we will cover it next week. But Dan already answered in the comments, but I just want to make sure anybody watching later knows it. What are the ideal temperatures for a seahorse tank? That's our final question. And then I'm going to ask you guys if you have anything to say. Go ahead.
You want me to repeat it?
Sure.
Okay. Ideal temperature is typically 72 to 74, and your seahorses can go down to 68. My cutoff for the warm temperatures is usually 77. Once my tanks get to 77, I'm then in the mode to make sure they don't go any higher than that. Ideally, though, long term, you'll find that people who've kept seahorses for the most amount of years, and when I say the seahorses for the most amount of years, the same seahorses for 5 to 10 years are people that keep their tanks at 72 to 74 degrees.
Gotcha. Ray, you've stayed with us this whole time. It's 10:17. You're past your bedtime, sir.
Well, bedtime's not till midnight.
I'm just teasing you, but I'm so glad you stayed. Was there anything that you wanted to add about difficulties with fry or anything, period?
Not really. It's been a few years now since I raised any fry anyway. And then having MCI, it's a little harder to recall things when you want to.
Of course. What were
Things pop into your mind that, like, after you get off a show
Yeah, of course.
and talking here, damn, I should have mentioned this and that, but I couldn't think of it at the time I'm on.
Well, the next time that happens, Ray, you just share this episode and on the top you post your comment. I wanted to say this. There you go. Anyways, I did want to ask you because I missed it because I was trying to set up what was going on before we started. Is everything okay?
Oh, I have a male barb that for a few days has been a problem. And whether it was there before or not, this morning I noticed the trigger was stuck down.
Mm.
And it was that way till, I can't remember, supper time or after that, when I finally got to it and I was gonna put it in the clove oil that Dan had mentioned to me. And
Ray, can I interrupt you for 1 second and say, for
Sure.
anyone that's watching that doesn't know what we're talking about, the trigger is a seahorse when it snicks. It literally has a trigger. I look like an idiot, but I'll show you a video, but it has, yeah, I'm like Mickey Mouse. Okay, so it has a trigger, which they call it the trigger, and it literally snicks when they're snicking food. I'm explaining it really badly, but the trigger is the thing under their chin that goes back and forth when they eat. So if it's stuck
just
in
think
one,
of it as a pistol, a 45 pistol from Western days without the guard around it, and that trigger sticking down.
there you go. And the bottom line is, if it's stuck, it's not going to work. They can't eat. So go on. And there was something else I was going to explain, but go ahead, Ray.
But anyway, when I did go to do the clove oil treatment,
That was it.
And-
Sorry, I'm interrupting again. Clove oil treatment means that he was
To
going to.
sedate.
Thank you. Go ahead.
to sedate the seahorse. And when I went to do it, the trigger wasn't stuck anymore. It's still not right. It has a problem on the underneath side where every time it inhales the water, the underside side of the jaw bulges out quite prominent compared to a normal situation. And I had that problem 10 years ago, and I don't remember being able to resolve it. I'm pretty sure I lost the seahorse then. But when I went off to feed the barbs here and the abs, that seahorse didn't eat tonight
Mm.
afterwards, even though the trigger's not stuck. So,
The idea of the clove oil was not to put the seahorse down.
right. It
The
was
idea of the clove oil
just
was
get it to
to
relax.
right. The trigger is a muscular type thing that happens, and the idea was to relax it to see if we could unfreeze it.
Not at all arguing. And I'm sorry. I was just trying to make sure everybody understood. And
But
clove
Dan felt
oil.
that there's more than one problem with this.
Mhm.
So it could be that the trigger was a separate problem and this other is due to something else. But like I say, here in Canada, I can't get any medication to do anything with it if I did know what to use.
So you were giving him a clove oil Xanax, basically. Clove oil can also be used to put a seahorse down, but that's not what he was doing. Thank you for describing that. You were giving him a Xanax, trying to see if he'd
I
chill
have
out and
used the
eat.
clove oil. I've used the clove oil to sedate them somewhat when you get pouch that
Emphasis.
won't open.
Yeah.
And Dan was the first one to tell me about that. And I think, 2013 that was.
Yep.
I'm seeing a whole other topic, and I'm just curious. Go ahead, Dan.
The idea of the clove oil, I don't use it very often in this context, but clove oil is used as an anesthetic, and we use it to put seahorses down humanely, but we also can use it for other things when there's a need. And one of the things that I found with pouch emphysema is that sometimes the muscles get so cramped up around the pouch, the male can't expel the gas. And even when you try to manually expel it, you can't open it. So what we discovered was way back was that we had a before we understood how to stop gas bubble pouch emphysema from happening, we had a seahorse that continuously kept getting pouch emphysema. We couldn't expel the gas, so we were going to put it down. When we dosed it with the clove oil, he spontaneously released the gas. So we immediately put him in clean water and revived him, and he never did it again. But I've had several instances where people could not open the pouch, and we use clove oil in that instance to relax the animal so we can open the pouch and get the air out.
Thank you for explaining. I'm curious with Ray's situation. The big thing that I'm confused about: trigger gets stuck. You use clove oil to relax him. The trigger's no longer stuck, but he won't eat. I'm curious about your expert opinion, Dan. Does this sound like a gill thing or?
We don't know. And unfortunately, when you're trying to treat something like this, you're trying to take your best educated guess at
course.
what's wrong. And what you try to do is treat the worst possible thing
Yep.
first. And that's usually a bacterial thing,
Yep.
because that can just take over if it's something else. And if you're treating for something else and it's bacterial. I truly don't know. The bulbing of the that bulge that he's talking about, I think that's intertied with the stuck trigger. We could have some atrophy with the muscles.
Mm.
This could be some type of nutritional type thing. It could be some type of, he did a freshwater dip already and that was negative for showing a problem. And so I don't think it's parasitic. So
Mm.
my best guess is it's either atrophy for some reason with the muscles, or it's some type of bacterial issue.
And the bottom line is, right, it's only one seahorse, right? Not saying that every seahorse is important, but
At the moment.
so
But
it
the
hasn't
thing-
spread.
The,
Okay.
the weird thing about it is, in 2010, when I had this problem, it wasn't the trigger, but this bulbous problem. It would swell up every time they intake water. The seahorses that I had at that time was my first colony of barbs.
Mm. That is odd that it skipped
I
generations.
never saw it again until now.
Well, when we want to be updated, and when you figure it out, let us know. All right. I want to say thank you also to KDTM for all your questions. And I can't imagine the commercial market for freshwater seahorses. I also see the commercial market for red or certain colored seahorses, and it's all crap. All right. Miss Holly, I wanted to ask you finally, just on a personal note, if you're willing to share. Are you okay? I know your electricity's
I'm fine.
out.
I was trying to show you the babies, but I
Oh.
think they just left. They were eating dinner. I don't know if you can see one now, maybe in the coral.
Let me try to pin you. Hang on. Okay, now you are big screen. Go. Oh, look at that little baby. Look at those little
There's
frogs.
one. There's another. Yeah, they were just having their dinner.
Go back up to the one that was swimming. Is his tail getting white, or is that just an illusion I'm seeing?
No, they turn white. Speaking of the colors you were just talking about, they turn the colors of where they're hanging out.
Yep.
Okay.
And at the age they are now, they're turning colors all day long. I have some bright orange and yellow things in here and white. And when they're hanging out with the white chains and the white coral, they turn almost white. It's like a very pale gray. I have a little bubbler thing. When they're hanging out in the bubbles, they turn like a black and silver color. When they're in the yellow chain or the orange coral, they change color to match that.
Yep.
So they're very cool. They're very pretty right now.
Okay.
Dan was probably bringing up another topic for another day, guys. I'm about to cut this. I've got to. But yeah, whitetail is an issue that we need to discuss on another day. But I've seen exactly what you've seen, Holly. I've done videos where seahorses on a black sponge filter are black. In my display tank, they're gray because of all the rock, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad they're doing well.
Some time ago, a number of years ago, I saw an advertisement for seahorses, and they were talking about this new species. They were blunt tail seahorses.
Blunt tail.
They had a whole pile of them that got tail rot, and they lost their tails, and they were selling them off as a new species.
You got to be careful, folks. If you want to learn about seahorses, you go to Seahorse Sources Group, and you come here to One Wednesday, because we will help you. And we often have no topic and just open chat where you guys can come and ask all your questions. We're going to fix things by next week. I absolutely promise. There will be no more rude interruptions, and we're going to figure out a way to get your questions to us and make sure that you can share as you do. And Holly is sharing again. I keep trying to make her big as she shares.
It's hard because I can't see when I'm holding the computer this way. I can't see.
Well, it's awesome, and that's what I'm thinking too. Would you guys in the audience, would you be interested in Holly or everyone at some point covering their tanks, showing the video of their tanks, showing what's going on in their tanks, how they accomplish certain things, what their filtration is? I'm seeing a future Wine Wednesday, but Holly, I just wanted to make sure you are okay. I see your
It's
electricity's
fine, the
out.
power's off, but everything's on. The tanks are all on generators, so all the tanks are going on a gas powered generator right now. So the seahorses are better off than we are.
Unfortunately, which sucks, but I'm glad they're okay, and it's awesome. And where did you learn about the generator?
It's kind of a way of life here because unfortunately, because of where I live, they shut off our power
Yeah.
under extreme fire danger.
Mm.
Since
And rolling
the local
blackouts.
power company burned down our whole town a few years back, they're required to turn off power now under high winds and things. So we get power shut off now and then. Most people around here have gas powered generators now for when that happens.
Yep.
And we have a small one. It's enough to run all my fish tanks and also my refrigerator freezer where their food lives.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, A plus for you, and I personally cared about you. I care about the seahorses, of course, too, but just you're safe.
so we're fine.
Okay.
There's no fire going right now.
Gotcha.
You know, around us everything's fine, but they tend to start up every time
Right.
they have power out like this. The fire will start. So
Kind of makes you
we're
wonder.
ready. We're ready.
Okay, guys. Well, listen. I've done my best to cover everything, but we're gonna call it for the night. We're gonna make some changes, let you know about them next week, and we really appreciate everyone that comes. Ray, Cheryl, Dan, Marina, Holly, Nicole, Laura, everyone that comes every week, we really appreciate you. We want to make more time for people to ask questions and cover the topics that that will help you. So we're interested in your comments. Please feel free to comment. Let me know what you think, and we'll let you know what we're going to change by next week. Thank you, the trolls, for making sure that I fix these things. Thank you for watching the video. And I'm going to call it for the night. Everybody say goodbye. Happy Wine Wednesday.
Good night.
Happy Wine Wednesday.
Happy Wine Wednesday, everybody. We'll see you next week. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hang on, everybody. Let me make sure it's off. Faux show. Hang on. Oh, God. What did I do?